Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. This phrase has echoed through the minds of Warhammer 40,000 fans for decades, painting a picture of a galaxy so steeped in violence and hatred that the very concept of peace seems like a distant, forgotten dream. Within this universe, humanity clings to survival through xenophobia so absolute that the Imperial Creed teaches its countless billions a simple doctrine: suffer not the alien to live. Every xeno species, from the smallest Gretchen to the mightiest Tyrannid hive fleet, exists as an enemy to be exterminated without mercy or hesitation. And yet, in the dark corners of this galaxy, in the forgotten frontier worlds and lawless void stations where Imperial authority grows thin, something remarkable occasionally happens. Something that defies every doctrine, every teaching, and every bitter lesson learned through 10,000 years of endless warfare. Sometimes, against all odds and all reason, an orc and a human find common ground. This is not a story of friendship in the way we might understand it. The relationship between an orc and a human will never be the warm companionship of childhood friends, the deep bond of brothers in arms who fight for each other rather than alongside each other, or the trust that comes from shared values and mutual understanding. No, what happens when an orc and a human form a connection is something altogether stranger, something that exists in the grey spaces between enemy and ally, between hatred and respect, between the desire to kill and the recognition that some opponents are too valuable to destroy. To understand how such an impossible thing could occur, we must first journey deep into the psyche of the orc species itself. We must walk among the greenskins, breathe the acrid air of their warships, and try to comprehend a mind so fundamentally alien that it can simultaneously believe two contradictory facts without experiencing a moment of cognitive dissonance. We must understand what drives these creatures, what they value, and what precious few things might earn their grudging respect. Only then can we begin to piece together how a human might survive long enough in their presence to become something more than prey, more than an enemy, more than just another skull to mount on a trophy rack. The journey ahead will take us from the blood-soaked hive cities of Armageddon to the lawless frontier ports where pirates of every species gather to trade, fight, and occasionally cooperate. We will witness the legendary confrontations between the mightiest orc warlord in the galaxy and the one human he refuses to kill. We will explore the strange world of the Bloodaxe clans, those orcs who have learned that sometimes cunning serves better than brute force. We will meet humans who have found themselves living among greenskins, not as slaves cowering in terror, but as valued advisors whose counsel is actually heeded. These stories exist in the margins of the official lore, often mentioned in passing or relegated to footnotes in ancient rulebooks. They represent moments when the grim darkness lightened just enough to reveal something unexpected, something that suggests that even in the most hopeless universe ever imagined, the capacity for connection transcends species and circumstance. They are tales of survival, of mutual respect born from combat, of practical cooperation between the most unlikely allies. So settle in and prepare to explore one of the strangest aspects of Warhammer 40,000 lore. This is the story of the orc who became friends with a human, or at least as close to friends as such beings could ever be. Understanding the orc mind. To comprehend how an orc might form any kind of positive relationship with a human, we must first understand what an orc actually is, not just physically, but psychologically and culturally. The greenskins are not simply alien barbarians who happen to be green and muscular. They are something far stranger, a fusion of the animal and the fungal, a species engineered millions of years ago by the mysterious Old Ones as living weapons in a war that ended before humanity ever learned to walk upright. As an orc stands roughly as tall as a human, though most would tower higher if they ever bothered to stand up straight. Their hunched, muscular frames are built for violence. with long arms ending in hands capable of crushing ceramite armor like tinfoil. Their thick skulls can absorb impacts that would cave in a human head, protecting brains that are surprisingly large and complex, despite what their brutish appearance might suggest. Red eyes glare out from beneath heavy brows, constantly scanning for threats or opportunities for violence. Their mouths are filled with jagged teeth, and when they speak, it comes in guttural barks, thick with saliva and crude curses. But the truly alien aspect of orc biology lies deeper, in the fungal symbiosis that makes up a fundamental part of their being. An orc is not purely animal tissue, and throughout their bodies, fungal matter integrates seamlessly with flesh, replacing complex organs with simpler but incredibly resilient systems. Where humans need kidneys, livers, and spleens, an orc has what Imperial researchers call fungal soup, a body cavity-filling mass that performs all the necessary biochemical functions with crude but effective efficiency. This fungal component grants orcs an almost supernatural toughness. They can survive injuries that would kill any human instantly, fighting on with limbs severed and organs ruptured, driven by a constitution that simply refuses to acknowledge the concept of fatal damage. The fungal nature of orcs also explains their reproduction, or rather, their propagation. Throughout an orc's life, it constantly releases spores from its skin, what invisible to the naked eye and nearly impossible to eradicate completely. When an orc dies, these spores burst forth in vast quantities, drifting on the wind before burrowing into soil where they begin a remarkable life cycle. First come the squigs, small biting creatures that feed on the moss and fungi growing from the buried spores. Then snotlings appear, tiny chattering beings that tend the growth and build primitive structures. Next emerge Gretchen, larger and more intelligent than snotlings, but still smaller and weaker than true orcs. Finally, after months or even years, full-sized orcs burst from the ground, already possessing an instinctive knowledge of their culture, language, and purpose. This means that every planet an orc sets foot on becomes infected, potentially forever. While a single spore in a forgotten cave can give birth to an entire invasion force, given enough time. It makes the greenskins nearly impossible to truly eliminate, a fact that has frustrated Imperial commanders for millennia. But physical toughness and infectious reproduction, remarkable as they are, do not explain what makes orcs truly unique. For that, we must delve into their psychology, and here we enter territory so alien that human minds struggle to grasp it fully. Orcs do not think like humans, where we might agonize over decisions, weighing outcomes and consequences. An orc simply does. They live entirely in the present moment, following instincts and impulses without the burden of anxiety about the future or regret about the past. This is not stupidity, despite what many Imperial citizens believe. Our orcs possess cunning and can plan complex strategies when needed, but they lack the capacity for existential dread, for questioning their purpose, for wondering if their lives have meaning. An orc knows why it exists: to fight. That is enough. That is everything. This absolute certainty gives orcs a psychological resilience that no other species can match. While Eldar grieve for their lost empire, and humans cower before the horrors of the galaxy, orcs charge forward with utter confidence, bellowing their war cries and reveling in the violence. They fear nothing, because the concept of fear, as we understand it, simply does not register in their minds the same way. Even death holds no terror for them, because every orc believes that when they finally fall in battle, their soul will join the eternal war fought by their gods in the warp, in becoming part of the great spiritual crusade that never ends. Speaking of their gods, we cannot understand orc psychology without examining their religion, such as it is. Orcs worship two deities, Gork and Mork, twin war gods who embody the two aspects of orcish nature. Gork is brutal, but cunning. Mork is cunning, but brutal. The difference between these two might seem trivial to an outsider, a joke even. But to orcs, it represents a fundamental philosophical divide. Mork hits you when you are not looking. Gork hits you even harder when you are looking. It is the difference between the sneaky backstab and the overwhelming frontal assault, between the ambush and the charge, between tactics and pure violence. Orcs argue constantly about which god is superior, and these arguments frequently escalate into full-scale brawls that leave dozens dead. Yet paradoxically, both gods are equally revered, and orcs will pray to whichever one seems more appropriate for their current situation. The duality reflects the orc character perfectly. They are capable of surprising cunning and tactical sophistication, but they never lose their fundamental love of direct, brutal violence. These gods are not mere mythology. In the psychic mirror universe of the Warp, Gork and Mork exist as actual entities, sustained and empowered by the collective psychic energy of every orc in the galaxy. All orcs possess some degree of psychic sensitivity, though most manifest it unconsciously. When enough greenskins gather in one place, their combined psychic field becomes so powerful it can literally warp reality, making their ramshackle technology function through belief alone. An orc weapon that would be a useless pile of scrap in human hands becomes a devastating instrument of destruction when wielded by a greenskin, because the orc believes it will work. And that belief, multiplied by millions of orc minds, makes it so. This brings us to the great crusades that orcs launch across the galaxy, massive migrations of war that they call the Green Tide, or simply the Crusade. When a particularly powerful orc warlord rises to prominence, their psychic presence resonates through the warp, calling to orcs across light years of space. Greenskins feel the pull, an irresistible urge to gather, to fight, to be part of something bigger. These crusades can grow to involve billions of orcs, sweeping across entire sectors and leaving devastation in their wake. They represent the orc species at its most dangerous, when their natural tendency toward infighting is temporarily suppressed in favor of directing their violence outward at everyone else. Yet even in these massive crusades, individual orcs retain their essential character. They are not mindless drones following orders. Each greenskin is an individual with their own personality quirks, preferences, and oddities. Some orcs love speed and dedicate themselves to building and racing ramshackle vehicles. Others prefer to hunt dangerous beasts, proving their prowess by taking down creatures that could easily kill lesser warriors. Still others become obsessed with accumulating loot, filling their lairs with trophies and treasures. This individuality is crucial to understanding how an orc might form a relationship with a human. Because while orcs do not have friends in the way we understand the concept, they do recognize and value certain qualities in others. They respect strength, both physical and mental. They admire cunning, especially when it is used to achieve victory. They appreciate a good fight, and an opponent who makes them work for their victory earns a status that simple prey never could. The orc language has a word that comes closest to what we might call friendship, scumgrod, though its translation is more accurately favorite enemy. A scumgrod is someone the orc enjoys fighting so much that they do not want to kill them, because doing so would mean losing the opportunity for future battles. It is a relationship based entirely on mutual combat, and a bond forged in violence and sustained by the promise of more violence to come. For a human to become a scumgrod to an orc is perhaps the highest honor the greenskins can bestow. It means you have fought so well, so fiercely, so cleverly, that you have transcended the category of mere enemy and become something special. The orc will still try to kill you, of course, but they will do so with a certain fondness, and if you survive, they might just let you live to fight another day. This is not friendship as we know it, but in the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps it is the closest thing to it that can exist between such different species. The human perspective in the grim darkness. To understand how a human might come to work with, trade with, or even develop a strange sort of respect for an orc, Or we must first comprehend the monumental obstacles standing in the way of such a relationship. The Imperium of man is not merely xenophobic in the casual sense of disliking or distrusting aliens. It has elevated hatred of the Xenos to the level of holy doctrine, enshrined it in religious law, and made it a cornerstone of human survival for 10,000 years. The official position of the ecclesiarchy, the state church that guides the spiritual life of countless trillions of imperial citizens, could not be clearer. Suffer not the alien to live. These 6 words encapsulate humanity's approach to every non-human intelligence in the galaxy. From the moment a child in the Imperium is old enough to understand language, they are taught that aliens are not merely enemies to be defeated in war. They are abominations, affronts to the natural order, as creatures whose very existence is a crime against the God Emperor and everything he built. This teaching is not presented as opinion or preference. It is absolute truth, as fundamental and unchangeable as gravity or the movement of the stars. To question it is heresy. To violate it is treason, and both crimes carry the same punishment: death, often preceded by torture, and always accompanied by the damnation of the soul. The roots of this xenophobia run deep, watered by blood and tragedy across 10 millennia of human history. During the Age of Strife, when humanity's first great stellar empire collapsed and warp storms isolated every human world from every other, aliens took advantage of the chaos. Some conquered human colonies and enslaved the populations. Others simply exterminated them. But when the Emperor finally reunited humanity and launched his great crusade to reclaim the stars, his armies found countless worlds where humans had been reduced to cattle, bred as food, or worse by alien overlords. These discoveries were not isolated incidents. They were the norm. Everywhere the Great Crusade reached, it found evidence of Xenos predation on humanity. The lessons were clear. Aliens could not be trusted. They could not be negotiated with. They could not be allowed to exist in proximity to human populations. The only safe alien was a dead alien. This philosophy became imperial policy, enforced with religious fervor by the Adeptus Ministorum and brutal efficiency by the Inquisition. Any imperial citizen caught in the act of aiding, trading with, or showing mercy to Xenos could expect a visit from the Inquisition, followed by interrogation, execution, and the probable purge of everyone they had ever known, just to ensure the taint of their heresy did not spread. Yet despite these draconian measures, despite the threat of torture and death, despite millennia of propaganda and indoctrination, humans still sometimes find themselves in situations where cooperation with Xenos becomes the lesser of available evils. This happens most often on the frontier, those vast regions of space where imperial authority exists more in theory than in practice. The galaxy is simply too large, and the Imperium too overstretched, to maintain constant oversight of every world, every void station, every asteroid mining colony. In these forgotten corners, different rules apply. Survival trumps ideology, pragmatism overcomes doctrine, and sometimes, just sometimes, a human discovers that the Xenos standing across from them is more useful as a temporary ally than as a corpse. Rogue traders represent perhaps the most legitimate avenue for human-Xenos cooperation. These merchant princes carry warrants of trade signed by the Emperor himself, ancient documents that grant them extraordinary freedom to operate beyond imperial law. They can travel to prohibited worlds, trade in forbidden goods, and yes, even negotiate with Xeno species, all in the name of expanding the Imperium's reach and filling its coffers. A rogue trader who hires orc mercenaries for a particularly dangerous expedition might face criticism from hidebound officials, but they cannot be prosecuted for heresy, not when their warrant explicitly allows such actions. As below the rogue traders in both status and legal protection are the countless merchants, smugglers, pirates, and desperate colonists who make up the bulk of humanity's presence on the frontier. These people live in a world of hard choices and harder compromises. When Orc raiders attack a colony world, and the nearest Imperial Guard regiment is months away, does the planetary governor refuse to negotiate, ensuring the death of everyone under their protection? Or do they send an emissary with an offer? We will give you weapons, ammunition, and supplies if you attack our rivals on the neighboring world instead. It is a devil's bargain, but sometimes the only choice is which devil to deal with. Such arrangements are always temporary, always fragile, and always kept as secret as possible. If the Inquisition learns of them, everyone involved will die screaming. But the Inquisition cannot be everywhere, and on the frontier, secrets can be kept for generations. There is another class of human who might find themselves in regular contact with orcs, slaves. The greenskins are perfectly happy to keep human captives, though not out of any economic calculation about the value of slave labor. Orcs keep slaves because having beings to order around makes them feel more important, and because humans can perform delicate tasks that orc fingers are too clumsy for. A human slave who proves useful, who demonstrates technical skills or valuable knowledge, might survive for years in orc captivity. They will never be treated well by human standards, but they might achieve a status above simple property, becoming something more like a valued tool. In rare cases, a human slave might even become a trusted advisor to an orc warlord. The greenskins are not so arrogant as to ignore useful information regardless of its source. An orc boss who captures an Imperial Guard captain might keep that captain alive to explain human tactics and strategies. Over time, a strange dynamic can develop. The orc comes to value the human's counsel. The human realizes their survival depends on making themselves indispensable. Neither would call the other a friend, but they might acknowledge a certain professional relationship, a mutual dependence that transcends the normal master-slave dynamic. For Imperial Guard soldiers, especially commissars, there is one more pathway to orc respect, though it is perhaps the most dangerous. Combat. An Imperial warrior who fights with exceptional courage, cunning, or skill might earn the attention of orc commanders. Greenskins respect strength above all else, and they do not limit that respect to their own species. A human who kills numerous orcs, who survives battles that should have been fatal, who demonstrates the kind of warrior spirit that orcs themselves value, might find themselves elevated in orc eyes from mere prey to worthy opponent. This respect manifests in strange ways. An orc who respects a human opponent might spare their life after defeating them in combat, not out of mercy, but out of the desire to fight them again. They might send challenges through intermediaries, setting up future confrontations like one might schedule a sporting match. They might even, in the most extreme cases, refuse to allow anyone else to kill their favored enemy, claiming that human as their exclusive property. To receive such recognition from an orc is both an honor and a curse. On the one hand, it means you have achieved something remarkable, that you have impressed a species that is nearly impossible to impress. On the other hand, it means you now have a very large, very violent alien who will pursue you across the galaxy for the chance to fight you again and again and again until one of you finally dies. And throughout all of this, throughout every frontier deal, and every strange relationship forged in the margins of Imperial space, there hangs the constant threat of discovery. The Inquisition does not forgive. It does not understand nuance or necessity. Any Imperial citizen found to have trafficked with Xenos, for whatever reason, will be declared excommunicate traitorous and hunted to the ends of the galaxy. Their family will be killed. Their friends will be interrogated. The very records of their existence will be scrubbed from history. This is the tightrope that any human must walk if they wish to survive contact with orcs as anything other than a corpse. They must balance the practical necessities of survival against the absolute dogma of the Imperium. They must keep their secrets buried deep, and they must never, ever forget that in the eyes of Imperial law, the alien is always the enemy, regardless of circumstance. Yet despite all these obstacles, despite the doctrine and the dogma and the threat of death, humans and orcs still sometimes find common ground. Because in the end, both species share certain fundamental traits. Both value strength, or both understand the language of violence, both can recognize cunning when they see it, and both, in their own ways, can develop a grudging respect for a worthy opponent. In the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps that is the foundation on which the strangest relationships are built. Blood axe, orcs, the cunning exception. Among the great clans that divide orc society, none are more controversial, more mistrusted by their own kind, and more likely to interact positively with humans than the blood axes. To understand how an orc might willingly work alongside humans, trade with them, or even develop a cooperative relationship, we must first understand what makes the blood axes so different from their greenskin cousins, and why other orcs view them with such suspicion. The story of the blood axes begins in the early days of Imperial expansion, during the Great Crusade, when the Emperor's forces first encountered significant orc populations. Of all the orc clans engaged in battle with humanity during this period, one group distinguished itself not through greater ferocity or larger numbers, but through something that other orcs found deeply disturbing: the willingness to learn from their enemies. The blood axes studied human tactics. They observed how Imperial forces coordinated their attacks, how they used combined arms warfare, how they established supply lines and defensive positions, and then, heretically in the eyes of other orcs, they began to copy these techniques. Blood axe warbands started using camouflage, painting their armor in mottled patterns that helped them blend into their surroundings. Oh, never mind that orcs are colorblind, and their camouflage was often bright purple or neon green. The intent was what mattered, the acknowledgement that sometimes sneaking worked better than charging. They adopted human-style military organization, creating clear command structures and unit designations. They learned the value of tactical withdrawal, that sometimes retreating to fight another day made more sense than dying in a glorious but pointless last stand. This last innovation particularly horrified other orcs, who viewed retreat as the ultimate cowardice. In orc society, where status is determined by size and aggression, the willingness to run away marked the blood axes as dangerously un-orky. But the blood axes' most controversial practice was their willingness to trade with humans, and in some cases, even fight alongside them. Yet this began out of pure practicality. Blood axes realized that humans made excellent equipment, especially vehicles and weapons. While orc mechboys could build functional machines through a combination of intuition and psychic belief, human technology worked on actual principles of engineering. A human-made tank required maintenance and fuel, but it would not spontaneously explode because the orc driving it stopped believing in it hard enough. So the blood axes began to trade. They would capture Imperial equipment during raids and study it, learning how it worked. They would seek out human smugglers and black market dealers, trading looted Xenos artifacts or raw materials for weapons and ammunition. These exchanges were always tense, always dangerous, but they happened with sufficient regularity that certain protocols developed, and a neutral meeting ground would be established. Each side would bring a small escort. The trade would be conducted quickly and efficiently, with both parties ready to turn on each other at the slightest provocation. Over time, some blood axe clans took this cooperation even further. They began hiring themselves out as mercenaries to human employers, particularly rogue traders, operating far beyond Imperial oversight. The arrangement benefited both parties. The humans gained access to warriors who were fearless, incredibly tough, and required no complex logistics beyond point them at the enemy and tell them to fight. The orcs got paid in weapons, ammunition, and most importantly, guaranteed combat against interesting opponents. Of course, these mercenary arrangements came with significant risks for the human employers. Our orcs are not known for their reliability or their respect for contracts. A blood axe mercenary company might fight brilliantly for a human employer one day and turn on them the next if a better offer came along, or if they simply got bored. The payment had to be good, the fighting had to be regular, and the human employer needed to maintain a position of strength. Show any weakness, and the orcs would almost certainly decide that taking everything by force made more sense than waiting to be paid. The most famous example of Bloodaxe mercenary service comes from the Praetorian campaign on Monta 7, where a regiment of Imperial Guard forces hired an entire company of Bloodaxe orcs to help defend a hive city against a Dark Eldar raid. The orcs fought with typical greenskin enthusiasm, as their presence on the walls terrifying the attacking Eldar into breaking off their assault earlier than they might have otherwise. When the battle ended, the Bloodaxes collected their payment, a substantial amount of Imperial weapons and ammunition, and departed peacefully. The Praetorian commander who authorized their hiring was later censured by his superiors, but he escaped execution because his gamble had succeeded. Within Orc society, the Bloodaxes' behavior marks them as deeply suspect. Other clans view them as treacherous, cowardly, and worst of all, insufficiently orky. Goth orcs, who pride themselves on their brutal straightforwardness, particularly despise the Bloodaxes and their cunning ways. Evil sons, who value speed and aggression, consider them too slow and calculating. Even bad moons, but who share the Bloodaxes' interest in accumulating wealth and equipment, look down on them for being willing to work for humans rather than simply taking what they want.
You know, I have to say, researching this topic really changed how I think about the orcs in this setting. We always see them as this mindless green tide, right? Just a wall of violence and crude jokes. But digging into these stories about Yarrick and Gaskell, about the Bloodaxes and their weird pragmatism, I started to realize that the orcs might actually be the most honest faction in 40k. They don't dress up their violence in religious justification like the Imperium does. They don't pretend it's for some greater good. They just fight because fighting is what they do. And in that brutal honesty, there's something almost, refreshing. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want to meet an orc in real life. But as a narrative device, as a way to explore what happens when you strip away all the pretense and just have pure, distilled conflict, it's fascinating. And the fact that even they can form these weird bonds of respect, that says something about the setting that I think gets overlooked. But anyways, let's continue.
This inter-clan tension means that Bloodaxe orcs often find themselves as outcasts within greenskin society. They form their own war bands, recruit from their own kind, and maintain a separate identity that sets them apart from the larger orc crusades. This isolation actually reinforces their tendency to work with other species. When you are already considered unorky by your peers, there is little additional stigma in taking that association with humans one step further. The Bloodaxes have developed their own subculture within orc society, one that values cunning over brute force, at least in theory. They still love a good fight as much as any orc, and they are just as dangerous in combat, but they approach warfare with a subtlety that other clans find baffling. A Bloodaxe war boss might actually plan an assault, considering variables like terrain and enemy strength, rather than just charging forward and trusting in Gork and Mork to sort everything out. This capacity for planning makes Bloodaxes the orc clan most likely to maintain long-term relationships with human traders or employers. They understand the concept of future benefit, that doing something now might pay off later. They can restrain their natural impulse to immediately loot and pillage if they believe that showing patience will lead to greater rewards down the line. It is still a tenuous restraint, always one bad decision away from collapsing into typical orc violence. But it exists in a way that would be impossible for other clans. Interestingly, Bloodaxes are also more likely to take human slaves and actually keep them alive long enough to be useful. While most orcs view humans as either targets or barely tolerable laborers, Bloodaxes recognize that humans possess skills and knowledge that can be valuable. A Bloodaxe war boss might keep a captured Imperial engineer alive to maintain their looted vehicles, or retain a former merchant to handle negotiations with human traders. These humans occupy a strange position in Bloodaxe society, neither fully slaves nor fully trusted, but valued for what they can provide. Some Bloodaxes even go so far as to learn Low Gothic, the common language of the Imperium, allowing them to communicate directly with humans without needing translators. But this linguistic ability opens up possibilities that would be impossible for other orcs. A blood axe who can speak human languages can negotiate contracts, extract information from prisoners without simply beating them into incoherence, and present themselves as something other than mindless savages to potential human allies. The Empire has long recognized the unique threat posed by blood axes. While other orc clans are dangerous in straightforward ways, they attack, they destroy, they move on. Blood axes are dangerous because they adapt, they learn, they remember. An Imperial force that defeats a blood axe warband might find themselves facing those same orcs a year later, but this time, the Greenskins will have learned from their previous defeat and adjusted their tactics accordingly. This adaptability extends to their relationships with humans. A blood axe clan that successfully trades with a particular rogue trader or smuggler might maintain that relationship for years, even decades. They will remember which humans dealt fairly and which tried to cheat them. They will develop preferences for certain traders over others. They will, in their own crude way, build networks of contacts throughout the criminal underworld of the Imperium's frontier regions. Of course, we must be careful not to romanticize these relationships. Blood axes are still orcs. They are still violent, aggressive, and dangerous. They still solve most problems by hitting them very hard. They still view humans as weak, fragile beings who are entertaining to fight and occasionally useful to trade with, but never equals. A human who mistakes blood axe pragmatism for actual friendship is likely to end up dead, possibly because the orc got bored, possibly because a better offer came along, or possibly just because the orc woke up in a bad mood. But within the narrow confines of what is possible between two such different species, the blood axes represent the greenskins, most likely to develop something approaching a functional relationship with humans. They are the orc clan that proves the existence of a middle ground between kill on sight and impossible coexistence. They demonstrate that even in the grim darkness of the far future, pragmatism can occasionally trump ideology, and mutual benefit can create connections that transcend species hatred. For any humans seeking to work with orcs, understanding the blood axes is essential. They are the exception that proves the rule, the outliers whose very existence suggests that the absolute xenophobia of imperial doctrine, while understandable, might not be the only possible approach to Xenos relations. They are living proof that even the most alien mind can find common ground with humanity, provided the incentives are right and both parties benefit from cooperation. And in the vast, uncaring galaxy of Warhammer 40,000, that small possibility of cooperation, no matter how fragile or self-interested, might be the closest thing to hope that anyone can find. The legend of Yarrick and Gazkul. If there exists one relationship between an orc and a human that transcends all others, one bond forged in fire and blood that has become legendary across the galaxy. It is the strange connection between Commissar Sebastian Yarrick and the mighty warlord Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka. This is not a friendship in any conventional sense. It is not even really cooperation, but it represents perhaps the purest example of what orcs call a scumgrod relationship, where mutual respect born from countless battles creates a bond stronger than hatred, more enduring than enmity. To understand this relationship, we must begin on the world of Armageddon in the year 941 M41, when Gazkul Thraka launched what would become known as the Second War for Armageddon. The planet had strategic importance to the Imperium, a hive world with massive industrial capacity and a position along critical shipping lanes. Gazkul, receiving what he claimed were visions from Gork and Mork themselves, gathered a massive invasion force and descended upon Armageddon with the fury of a hurricane. The planetary governor, Hermann von Straub, was a man of legendary incompetence and arrogance. When the initial orc attacks came, he insisted that Armageddon's planetary defense forces could handle the threat without outside assistance. He ignored or suppressed reports of the invasion's true scale, refusing to call for help until it was almost too late. Among the few voices urging immediate action was Sebastian Yarrick, a commissar who had spent years studying orc culture and warfare. Yarrick recognized something in the patterns of the attack, a cunning and coordination that suggested this was no ordinary greenskin raid. Von Straub, feeling threatened by Yarrick's competence and popularity among the troops, Orc punished him for circumventing the chain of command by banishing him to Hades' Hive, one of the planet's most remote and supposedly least important population centers. It was meant to be a humiliation, a way to silence a troublesome subordinate by sending him somewhere he could do no harm. Von Straub could not have been more wrong. As Ghazghakul's forces swept across Armageddon with terrifying speed, overwhelming city after city through superior numbers and surprising tactical sophistication, Hades' Hive became the key to the planet's survival. Yarrick, given command of the Hive's defense through the simple absence of anyone more senior, set about preparing for what he knew would be a siege of epic proportions. He organized the defenders with iron discipline, established supply lines, fortified every approach, and most importantly, studied his enemy. Yarrick already spoke Orcish, having learned it years earlier from a captured raider. This gave him an advantage that no other Imperial commander on Armageddon possessed. He could listen to intercepted Orc communications and understand not just the words, but the intent, the culture, the psychology behind them. He knew that Orcs respected strength above all else, and he determined to show them strength that would become legendary. When Ghazghakul's forces finally reached Hades' Hive, they found a defender who anticipated their every move. Stormboy aerial assaults were shredded by concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Commando infiltrations through the sewers met prepared tunnel fighters who turned the underground into a charnel house. Siege engines were sabotaged before they could be deployed. And every stratagem the Orcs attempted, every trick they tried, Yarrick had a counter prepared. The defense of Hades' Hive became personal for both commanders. Ghazghkul, frustrated by this single human who could match wits with an Orc warlord, began to focus more and more of his attention on breaking Yarrick's defense. Yarrick, understanding that holding Hades' Hive might be the only thing preventing Armageddon's complete collapse, refused to give an inch of ground. The two never met face to face during this initial siege, but they learned each other's minds through the moves and countermoves of their strategic chess match. The most famous moment of Yarrick's defense came when he faced the Orc warboss Uglhard in single combat. The massive greenskin, leading an assault that had finally broken into the Hive's outer defenses. He challenged the human commander directly. Yarrick accepted, though he knew the physical mismatch was enormous. Uglhard's power claw, a massive mechanical fist crackling with energy, could crush ceramite armor like paper. Against it, Yarrick had only his chainsword and his iron will. The battle was brief and brutal. Uglhard's power claw came down like a thunderbolt, and despite Yarrick's best efforts to dodge, it connected with his right arm, severing the limb at the wrist in a shower of blood and sparks. For any normal man, this would have been the end. The shock, the blood loss, the sheer trauma of losing a limb would have been fatal within minutes. But Sebastian Yarrick was not a normal man. Even as his severed hand hit the ground, Yarrick channeled his rage and pain into one perfect strike with his chainsword, taking Uglhard's head from his shoulders in a spray of green blood. Before the Orc's body hit the ground, Yarrick bent down, picked up the severed power claw still clutching his hand, and pried the dead fingers loose. Then, in front of the horrified Orcs and awed Imperial defenders, he raised the power claw high, showing both armies that he had claimed the weapon as his own trophy. The psychological effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The Orcs, seeing their warboss decapitated and his prize weapon claimed by a human who fought on despite catastrophic injury, broke and fled in superstitious terror. The human defenders, witnessing their commander's impossible fortitude, surged forward with renewed courage, turning the Orc retreat into a rout. Only after the enemy had been driven back did Yarrick finally allow himself to collapse from blood loss. When he woke in the Medici facility, Imperial chirurgeons had stabilized him, but his right arm ended in a stump. No matter. Yarrick had them attach Ugelhard's power claw directly to the stump, creating a crude cybernetic limb that became his signature weapon for the rest of his life. Every orc who saw it remembered the human who had killed a war boss in single combat, despite losing his arm, who had claimed an orcish weapon as his own, and who continued fighting as if such a wound was merely an inconvenience. Word of this spread through the orc forces like wildfire. They began to whisper about Old Bale Eye, a nickname they gave Yarrick because of his augmetic eye, another war wound that he wore proudly. The stories grew with each telling, as orc stories always do. They said Yarrick's eye could kill with a glance. They said his touch meant death. They said he was unkillable, blessed by the Emperor himself to be a perfect warrior. And Gazkul heard these stories. The warlord became fascinated by this human who had done the impossible. He had earned genuine orc respect. Gazkul began to see Yarrick not as just another enemy commander, but as a worthy opponent, someone whose defeat would mean something, someone who made the war more interesting simply by existing. He wanted to face this human personally, to test his strength against someone the orcs themselves feared. The siege of Hades' hive continued for months, with Gazkul himself eventually leading assaults against the hive's walls, but every attack failed, and not through overwhelming numbers, but through the brilliance of Yarrick's defense and the absolute refusal of his troops to surrender. Orcs died in their thousands against walls that never fell, against a defense that bent but never broke. Eventually, Gazkul realized that Hades' hive could not be taken, not without losses that would cripple his ability to continue the wider war. But before withdrawing, he managed to corner Yarrick personally in a desperate final assault. The two finally met face to face, orc warlord and human commissar, and their brief clash left Yarrick badly wounded and barely alive. But Gazkul did not kill him. The warlord could have. It would have been easy. Yarrick was broken, bleeding, defenseless. One blow would have ended the life of the human who had defied him for so long. But Gazkul stayed his hand. This human was too valuable, too perfect an opponent to waste. Killing him now would be like destroying a favorite weapon or crushing a prized trophy. It would be wasteful. Instead, Gazkul ordered his forces to pull back, allowing the remaining Imperial defenders time to evacuate Hades' hive. Yarrick was carried out with the retreating troops, his stubborn defense having bought enough time for Space Marine reinforcements to arrive. The Blood Angels, led by Commander Dante, launched a massive counter-offensive that eventually drove Gazkul from Armageddon entirely. The orcs departed, but both commanders knew this was not over. This was merely a pause. Yarrick spent the next decades hunting Gazkul across the galaxy. He assembled a crusade, gathered ships and soldiers, and pursued his enemy with an obsession that bordered on madness. He studied every report of Gazkul's movements, learned the warlord's patterns, predicted where he would strike next. It became a cat-and-mouse game across the stars, with each commander trying to anticipate the other's moves. This pursuit culminated on the world of Golgotha, where Yarrick believed he had finally cornered his nemesis. He led a massive Imperial force in an assault on Gazkul's position, confident that this time, the orc warlord could not escape. It was only when his forces were fully committed that Yarrick realized the terrible truth. The entire campaign had been a trap. Gazkul had allowed himself to be cornered, specifically to lure Yarrick into a killing ground of the orcs' choosing. The battle was a massacre. Gazkul's forces fell upon the Imperials with overwhelming numbers and perfect tactical positioning. Within hours, Yarrick's crusade was shattered, his forces destroyed or scattered, his carefully laid plans reduced to smoking ruins. And Yarrick himself was captured, dragged before Gazkul in chains. This should have been the end. Any other orc warlord would have killed the captured enemy commander, probably after torture or ritual humiliation. But Gazkul, again, did something unexpected. He had Yarrick brought to his command chamber, not as a prisoner to be executed, but almost as a guest to be informed. What happened next has been recorded in several sources, each slightly different, but all capturing the essential strangeness of the encounter. Gazgkul explained to Yarrick that he admired the human's tenacity, his strength, yet his refusal to give up even when defeat seemed certain. The warlord told Yarrick about his visions, his belief that Gork and Mork had chosen him for a great purpose. He revealed that he was going to return to Armageddon to finish what he had started there, and he wanted Yarrick to be there to oppose him. Then, impossibly, Gazkul released Yarrick. The Commissar was placed aboard a captured Imperial shuttle. Its controls fused to the bodies of other Imperial commanders who had been turned into grotesque servitors and sent back to Imperial space. It was a message, a challenge, and a promise all at once. Gazkul wanted his favorite enemy alive, active, and preparing for their next confrontation. True to his word, Gazkul returned to Armageddon years later, launching what became known as the Third War for Armageddon. And this conflict dwarfed the previous invasion, involving billions of orcs and requiring the mobilization of multiple Space Marine chapters and hundreds of Imperial Guard regiments. And commanding the defense, older now but no less determined, was Sebastian Yarrick. The Third War for Armageddon became a grinding stalemate that lasted for years, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory. Gazgkul's forces could not break the Imperial defense, but the Imperials lacked the strength to drive the orcs from the planet entirely. It was perfect, from the orc perspective. Endless fighting, worthy opponents, a battle that could continue indefinitely. But eventually, even Gazgkul grew bored with the stalemate. His visions from Gork and Mork told him that this was not his final purpose, and that greater battles awaited him elsewhere in the galaxy. So he withdrew his personal fleet, leaving the crusade on Armageddon to continue under his subordinates while he pursued the next stage of his grand plan. Yarrick, now an old man, but still burning with the need to end his nemesis once and for all, gave chase once more. The pursuit led to the Haunted Gulf, where Imperial and Orc fleets clashed in a massive void battle. Yarrick's forces managed to corner Gazgkul's flagship, the Kill Wrecker, apparently trapping the warlord with nowhere to run. But in a blaze of green psychic energy, the Kill Wrecker vanished into the warp, escaping once more. Yarrick watched his enemy disappear, understanding that their game would continue, possibly forever, or at least until one of them finally died. The relationship between Yarrick and Gazgkul transcends normal definitions of friendship or enmity. They are locked in an eternal dance of hunter and hunted, enemy and respected opponent, challenger and challenged. Gazgkul genuinely admires Yarrick, as much as an orc can admire anyone. He sees in the Commissar a reflection of orcish values, absolute determination, love of battle, refusal to accept defeat. For his part, Yarrick knows Gazkul better than perhaps any human in the galaxy. He has studied the warlord's tactics, anticipated his strategies, and come to understand the mind behind the brutish exterior. Neither would ever call the other a friend, but they have become something perhaps more meaningful in the context of their violent universe, worthy opponents whose existence gives meaning to each other's struggles. All Gazgkul fights better battles because Yarrick is there to oppose him. Yarrick has purpose because Gazgkul exists to be hunted. They are bound together by combat and respect, by countless encounters over decades of warfare, by the knowledge that each represents the best that their species can offer. In recent Imperial records, there have been reports of Yarrick's death, with the official announcement stating that the Emperor has called his servant home. But rumors persist that this is not the end, that Yarrick lives still, possibly even with orc assistance after a particularly fierce battle. Whether these rumors are true or merely wishful thinking, they speak to the legendary status that both the Commissar and his nemesis have achieved. The story of Yarrick and Gazkul proves that even in the grim darkness of the far future, even between species as different as orcs and humans, something approaching a relationship can exist. It will never be warm or peaceful. It will always be defined by violence and conflict. But within those narrow parameters, genuine respect can flourish, and two beings from different worlds can come to understand each other in ways that transcend species, culture, and the normal boundaries of comprehension. It is the closest thing to friendship that the galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 allows. Freebooters, pirates without borders. Beyond the organized clans and massive crusades, there exists a subset of orc society that operates by different rules, the freebooters. These are orcs who have abandoned traditional clan loyalty in favor of something that outsiders might mistake for piracy, but which represents a fundamentally different approach to the orcish way of life. In the strange economy of freebooter society, humans are not just enemies to be fought or slaves to be worked, but potential trading partners, temporary allies, and in rare cases, something that almost resembles crewmates. Freebooters begin their existence as outcasts. Most are orcs who have been exiled from their clans for various infractions, or who simply decided that the life of a pirate offered more opportunities for loot and adventure than following a war boss. Others are survivors of defeated warbands who escaped destruction and chose to strike out on their own rather than joining a new boss. Whatever their origin, and all freebooters share a common trait. They value personal profit and freedom over traditional orcish loyalty structures. A freebooter capitan operates a ship, sometimes alone but more often as part of a small fleet, sailing the void in search of targets to raid and plunder. Unlike the massive orc invasion fleets that sweep across sectors, freebooter vessels are relatively small and maneuverable, designed for hit-and-run attacks rather than sustained sieges. They prey on merchant vessels, raid isolated outposts, and occasionally hire themselves out as mercenaries when a good offer presents itself. This mercenary aspect is what brings freebooters into regular contact with humans, particularly the shadier elements of Imperial society. In the lawless frontier regions where Imperial authority barely exists, certain void stations and planetary ports have become neutral ground where species that would normally kill each other on sight can meet to trade, hire muscle, or simply drink in an uneasy truce. These places are dangerous, violent, and operating just barely within the bounds of what the Imperium will tolerate, but they serve a crucial economic function in regions where legitimate trade is impossible. A human smuggler operating in these regions might find themselves sitting across a table from a freebooter capitan, negotiating a deal that would see them both executed if the Inquisition ever learned of it. The orc wants payment in weapons, ammunition, or other goods that orcs value. The human wants protection for their convoy, or muscle for a raid against a rival, or simply safe passage through space that the freebooters control. Both parties understand that this relationship is purely transactional, that either could turn on the other at any moment, but as long as both benefit, the arrangement holds. These interactions have developed their own protocols over the centuries. When a freebooter ship approaches a human vessel flying certain signals, usually a combination of traditional pirate emblems and orcish clan markings, it indicates a willingness to negotiate rather than immediately attacking. The human crew will respond with their own signals, establishing a temporary truce while terms are discussed. Representatives from both ships will meet at a designated location, usually a neutral station, or sometimes even in the void itself, their ships within weapons range but not actively firing. The negotiations are always tense. Freebooters are still orcs, are prone to violence and easily bored by extended talking. A human negotiator must be strong, confident, and ideally surrounded by enough firepower to make the orcs think twice about simply taking what they want by force. But they cannot appear threatening enough to make the orcs think a fight is inevitable. That would trigger the greenskins' natural aggression. It is a delicate balance, maintained through a combination of respect, implied threat, and mutual greed. Payment to freebooter mercenaries usually comes in the form of teeth, orc teeth, which serve as their primary currency, or tradable goods like weapons and ammunition. The quality of orc teeth matters. Larger teeth from bigger orcs are worth more. Human employers have been known to keep stores of captured orc teeth specifically for hiring freebooter crews, though obtaining these teeth in the first place requires killing orcs, which creates its own risks and challenges. Once hired, a freebooter crew will generally honor their contract, at least until the agreed-upon period ends or until a better offer presents itself. They fight with typical orc enthusiasm, their presence on the battlefield terrifying enemies who might not have expected to face greenskins. A human commander employing freebooters must understand that these allies cannot be controlled in the traditional sense. You cannot give them complex orders or expect them to follow intricate battle plans. You point them at the enemy, tell them to fight, and then stay out of their way. The most successful human employers of freebooter mercenaries are rogue traders, as those merchant princes whose warrants of trade grant them extraordinary freedom to operate beyond imperial law. A rogue trader expedition venturing into unknown or hostile space might hire freebooter crews to supplement their forces, knowing that the greenskins' combat prowess and fearlessness make them valuable assets despite the risks. These arrangements can last for months or even years, with the same freebooter capitan working repeatedly for the same rogue trader household. Over time, something strange can develop from these repeated interactions. The human and orc participants begin to recognize each other, not as friends exactly, but as known quantities. The rogue trader learns which freebooter captains are most reliable, which ones will honor deals, and which will betray them at the first opportunity. The freebooters, as for their part, learn which human employers pay well and provide good fighting and which try to cheat them. This mutual familiarity can lead to situations that look remarkably like respect, or at least professional courtesy. A freebooter capitan might warn a preferred human employer about dangerous conditions ahead, or refrain from raiding their ships even when opportunities present themselves. A rogue trader might offer a freebooter crew first chance at a lucrative contract, or provide information about potential targets in exchange for future considerations. In the absolute fringe cases, some freebooters have been known to maintain semi-permanent relationships with human organizations. There are documented instances of freebooter crews who have worked for the same rogue trader dynasty for generations of greenskins, which, given orc lifespans, might only be a few decades. The orcs are not employees in any formal sense, and they remain free to come and go as they please, but they return repeatedly because the arrangement benefits them. Even stranger are the rare freebooter crews that include non-orc members. While this is incredibly unusual and violates most orcs' sense of proper order, freebooters are already outcasts who have rejected traditional clan structures. Some captains, particularly clever ones, have realized that having a human or two aboard ship can be useful. Humans can perform delicate maintenance that orc hands are too clumsy for. They can negotiate with other humans without immediately starting fights. They can read human star charts and navigate through imperial space with less chance of triggering automated defense systems. These human crew members occupy a strange position. They are not quite slaves, because slaves have no choice, and these humans often joined willingly, understanding that life aboard a freebooter ship might be their only option for survival. But they are not equals either. No orc would ever consider a human their equal. Instead, they exist in a liminal space, valued for their skills, but always aware that their usefulness is the only thing keeping them alive. The freebooter lifestyle attracts a certain type of human as well as a certain type of orc. These are people who have fallen through the cracks of imperial society, deserters, criminals, heretics, or simply those who could not stomach life under the Imperium's brutal rule. For them, the chaos and violence of life among orcs might actually be preferable to the grinding oppression of their former existence. They understand that they could die at any moment, that their orc companions might turn on them without warning, but at least they are free, or as free as anyone can be in the galaxy of Warhammer 40,000. The neutral ports where freebooters and humans mix are legendary for their violence and lawlessness. These are places where fights break out hourly, where different species eye each other with suspicion and hostility, where the only law is whatever the local boss decides to enforce. Yet they function after a fashion. Merchants sell goods to anyone with money or tradable items. Mercenaries of all species offer their services. Information brokers deal in secrets and rumors. And through it all, freebooters swagger and fight and trade, treating humans not as prey, but as partners in the great game of survival and profit. One famous example from the old lore describes a freebooter capitan named Big Killer, who operated a mixed crew of orcs and human pirates in the Coronis Expanse. His human crew members handled ship maintenance and navigation, while the orcs handled boarding actions and combat. The arrangement worked because both sides benefited. The humans gained protection and a share of the loot, while the orcs got technical skills and knowledge they could not provide themselves. When Big Killer's ship was finally destroyed by an Imperial Navy patrol, survivors reported that the orcs and humans had fought side by side to the bitter end. United not by friendship, but by the shared understanding that they would all die together if the ship fell. This is not to suggest that life among freebooters is somehow pleasant or safe for humans. It absolutely is not. Orcs remain dangerous, violent, and utterly alien in their thinking. A human aboard a freebooter ship must constantly prove their worth, constantly demonstrate that they are more valuable alive than dead. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and they might find themselves being used as ammunition or simply beaten to death for entertainment. But the existence of these relationships, however brutal and transactional, proves something important. Even in a universe defined by eternal war and absolute hatred, practical cooperation remains possible. As freebooters and their human associates demonstrate that species barriers can be crossed when mutual benefit provides sufficient incentive. They show that even orcs, perhaps the most straightforwardly violent species in the galaxy, can recognize value in beings they would normally just kill. The Imperium, of course, condemns all such interactions as heresy. Any human caught working with freebooters would be executed without trial. But on the frontier, far from the Emperor's light and the Inquisition's scrutiny, these relationships persist. They represent a shadow economy, a network of connections and transactions that official Imperial records deny exist, but which any experienced void traveler knows are absolutely real. In the grand tapestry of Warhammer 40,000 lore, freebooters occupy a unique position. Yet they are the orcs most likely to interact peacefully with other species. The greenskins who prove that even the most alien beings can find common ground with humanity when circumstances align. They are a reminder that in the vast darkness between stars, survival sometimes requires cooperation, even with those who should be eternal enemies. And for those few humans brave or desperate enough to walk among them, freebooters offer a strange sort of freedom, the freedom to live outside Imperial law, to make their own choices, and to die on their own terms, rather than as forgotten cogs in the Imperium's grinding machinery. It is a hard life, a violent life, a life that could end at any moment in a spray of blood and violence. But for some, that is still better than the alternative. Humans in Orc society. The relationship between orcs and humans becomes even stranger when we examine the humans who live not alongside orcs as temporary allies or trading partners, but within Orc society itself. These are the slaves, servants, advisors, and oddly integrated humans who have become, through circumstance or choice, part of the greenskin world. Their stories reveal surprising depths to Orc psychology and demonstrate that the rigid kill-all Xenos mentality of the Imperium might miss important nuances about how different species can coexist, even in the most unlikely circumstances. The most common category of humans in Orc society are slaves, and we should be clear about what this means. Orcs do not keep slaves for the same economic reasons that humans historically have. They do not need slave labor to build their economies or work their fields. The Orc ecosystem, with its snotlings and Gretchen emerging from spores, provides all the menial labor they require. Instead, Orcs keep human slaves primarily because having beings to order around reinforces the Orc social hierarchy. A boss with slaves is more important than a boss without slaves. It is a status symbol, a way of demonstrating power. Life for these slaves is brutal. Orcs have no concept of mercy or kindness as humans understand these terms. Slaves who displease their masters are beaten, killed, or sometimes eaten. The work they are forced to perform is backbreaking and endless. Food is scarce and of terrible quality. Medical care is non-existent. Most human slaves in orc captivity die within months, on work to death or killed in accidents or simply murdered when an orc gets bored and needs entertainment. But some slaves survive, and those who survive do so by making themselves valuable. This is where the relationship becomes interesting. Orcs, for all their brutality, are not stupid. They can recognize skill and competence when they see it. A human slave who demonstrates technical abilities, who can fix machines that orc mechs struggle with, who possesses knowledge that proves useful to their masters, might find their status gradually improving. They will still be a slave, still subject to the whims of their owners, but they become a valued slave, one whose death would be inconvenient rather than insignificant. Well, the historical lore provides several examples of humans who rose to surprising heights within orc society through this mechanism. One of the most famous is the case of Captain Sebastus Cyrong, an Imperial Guard officer who was captured by the Bloodaxe war boss Bogrot. Rather than being killed or condemned to meaningless labor, Cyrong realized that he possessed something the orcs desperately needed: knowledge of human tactics and psychology. Cyrong convinced Bogrot that he could serve as an advisor, helping the war boss understand how human armies think and fight. The orc, intrigued by this possibility, agreed to try. Cyrong, operating under the orcish name Scumgrod, began providing tactical counsel to Bogrot, advising him on human defensive patterns, likely Imperial responses to orc attacks, and the best ways to exploit human weaknesses. What makes this case particularly fascinating is that Cyrong was not actually defecting to the orc cause. He remained loyal to the Imperium throughout his captivity. His mission, assigned by Imperial intelligence before his capture, was to infiltrate Bogrot's warband and sow discord from within. By providing accurate tactical advice, he gained the war boss's trust. By occasionally suggesting strategies that would lead the orcs into Imperial traps, he served his true masters while maintaining his cover. The fact that this kind of deep cover operation was even possible speaks to how orcs can come to value and trust human advisors. Bogrot relied on Scumgrod's counsel for years, making strategic decisions based on the humans' recommendations. While the relationship was not friendship, Bogrot would have killed Cyrong without hesitation if the orc discovered the betrayal, but it was a form of professional cooperation, a recognition that the human's expertise had genuine value. Other humans in orc society occupy different niches. Some serve as technical specialists, maintaining the complicated Imperial equipment that orcs capture but lack the fine motor control to properly repair. A human with knowledge of Imperial machinery might spend their days keeping a war boss's looted Lehman Russ tank functional, making themselves indispensable through their specialized skills. Orcs will protect such humans from other greenskins who might harm them, not out of affection, but out of the same care they would show for a valuable tool. And there are even documented cases of humans serving as interpreters and negotiators for orc warbands. A Bloodaxe boss who regularly trades with human smugglers might keep a human captive specifically to handle these negotiations, understanding that human-to-human communication will be more efficient and less likely to break down into violence. The human interpreter walks a dangerous tightrope, needing to serve their orc master's interests while also not completely betraying their own species, knowing that too much obvious treachery might make them useless to both sides. The psychological impact of long-term captivity in orc society varies tremendously among human slaves. Some break completely, becoming hollow shells who perform their tasks mechanically while waiting for death. Others adapt, finding ways to survive and even thrive within the brutal confines of greenskin culture. A few, the truly exceptional or truly broken, begin to identify more with their captors than with humanity. These last cases are the most disturbing to Imperial authorities. There are reports of human slaves who have lived among orcs for so long that they have adopted orcish behavior patterns, speaking in the crude dialect of the greenskins, settling disputes through violence, even participating in orc social rituals. These humans horrify Imperial rescuers who sometimes encounter them during raids on orc positions. They are considered corrupted beyond redemption, tainted by their association with Xenos, and are usually executed rather than being returned to Imperial society. But from a purely observational standpoint, these deeply integrated humans prove something remarkable. The orc worldview can accommodate non-orcs who demonstrate the right qualities. What orcs value is strength, competence, and the willingness to fight. A human who shows these traits, even a slave, might earn a measure of respect that transcends species boundaries. One particularly interesting example comes from the fringe worlds of the Coronis Expanse, where a human woman, known only as Red Meg, supposedly became the de facto administrator for an entire orc settlement. According to the fragmentary reports, Red Meg had been a colonial administrator before her world was overrun by orcs. Rather than dying in the initial assault, she was captured and brought before the local war boss. The war boss, facing the challenge of managing a newly conquered human population that the orcs wanted to keep alive to work the planet's mines, decided to use Red Meg's administrative skills. She was ordered to organize the human survivors, establish work schedules, and handle the logistics that orcs found too boring to deal with directly. Over time, her authority expanded. She mediated disputes between human workers. She managed food distribution. She even advised the war boss on matters of governance that had nothing to do with humans. According to the reports, Red Meg lived for over a decade in this strange position, neither slave nor free, neither human nor orc, but something in between. When Imperial forces finally retook the planet, they found a functioning settlement where humans and orcs coexisted in a bizarre hierarchy. With Red Meg's name respected by both species. She was executed as a collaborator, of course, but her story remains in the archives as a testament to the strange possibilities that exist on the frontier. These stories share common elements. The humans involved possess skills or knowledge that orcs value. They demonstrate competence repeatedly, proving that they can be trusted to perform their assigned tasks. They survive the brutal initial period when most slaves die, either through luck or exceptional hardiness, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, they transition from being property to being part of the social structure, valued not for who they are, but for what they can do. The orcs who maintain these relationships also display consistent patterns. They are almost always blood axes, whose cultural openness to learning from other species makes them more likely to value human expertise. They are pragmatic, willing to overlook species boundaries when practical benefit is obvious, and they are secure enough in their own power that they do not feel threatened by having competent humans in positions of limited authority. None of this should be romanticized. Life in orc society as a human is terrible. The violence is constant. The danger is omnipresent. Most humans in this position die horrible deaths. Those who survive often do so by becoming complicit in atrocities against their own species. The psychological damage is profound and usually irreversible. But the existence of these relationships matters. They prove that even the most xenophobic species in the galaxy, and make no mistake, our orcs are intensely xenophobic in their own way, can make room for valuable individuals from other species. They demonstrate that cooperation between orcs and humans is possible when practical necessity overrides ideological purity. They show that the absolute doctrines of the Imperium, that Xenos must be destroyed without exception, that cooperation with aliens is always heresy, do not reflect the messy reality of how species actually interact in the dark spaces between stars. For the Imperium, acknowledging these nuances would undermine the ideological foundations of 10,000 years of xenophobic policy. So these stories are suppressed when possible. The participants executed when discovered, the records buried or destroyed. But they persist in rumors and whispered tales, an evidence that the galaxy is more complicated than the ecclesiarchy wants its believers to think. And perhaps, buried in these dark stories of captivity and survival, there is a seed of something that might, in a kinder universe, have grown into genuine understanding between species. In this universe, that seed withers and dies, crushed beneath the weight of endless war and absolute hatred. But it existed, briefly, proving that even in the grim darkness of the far future, the possibility of connection is never entirely extinguished. The mechanics of understanding. Having explored the various contexts in which orcs and humans might interact, we must now examine the practical mechanisms that make such relationships possible. How do beings so fundamentally different communicate? What allows them to find common ground? What are the actual, tangible processes by which an orc and a human might develop mutual respect or cooperation? The first and most obvious barrier is language. Orcs speak their own tongue, a crude and guttural language that reflects their straightforward nature. It is not a subtle language. There are no orcish words for concepts like mercy or compromise or peaceful negotiation, but it is functional, capable of expressing tactical information, issuing commands, and conveying the limited range of emotions that orcs typically experience. Fortunately for any human hoping to communicate with orcs, the greenskin language is not impossibly complex. Its grammar is simple, its vocabulary limited. A dedicated human linguist could learn basic Orcish in a matter of weeks and achieve functional fluency in a few months. The challenge is not intellectual, but practical. Where does one safely practice speaking with orcs? Commissar Yarrick famously learned Orcish from a captured raider, spending hours in interrogation chambers listening to the greenskins' speech patterns and gradually piecing together the language's structure. Other humans have learned through necessity, slaves forced to understand their master's commands or die. The most comprehensive Orcish dictionaries in Imperial records come from inquisitors who spent careers studying the Xenos threat and recognized that understanding the enemy's language provided crucial intelligence advantages. From the Orc perspective, learning human languages is less common, but not unknown. Blood axes in particular see value in understanding Low Gothic, the common tongue of the Imperium. An orc who can speak with human traders or interrogate human prisoners in their own language gains significant advantages in negotiations and intelligence gathering. The language comes less naturally to orc vocal cords than their own speech, but determined greenskins can manage functional Low Gothic after sustained exposure. Beyond mere language, communication between orcs and humans requires understanding fundamentally different psychologies. An orc does not think in terms of long-term consequences, careful planning, or subtle emotional nuance. They live in the immediate present, driven by instinct and impulse. A human trying to negotiate with an orc cannot present complex arguments about future benefits or abstract principles. They must frame everything in immediate, concrete terms. If you fight for me, you will get weapons and a good battle works. If we establish a mutually beneficial trade relationship based on comparative advantage, does not. The successful human negotiator keeps things simple, direct, and focused on things orcs value: fighting, loot, and respect. They speak in short sentences. They avoid flowery language or complicated metaphors. They make threats and promises in terms that leave no room for misinterpretation. And crucially, they back up their words with demonstrated strength, because orcs only respect those who can back their words with force. Orcs, for their part, can adapt their communication style when dealing with humans they have reason to accommodate. Bloodaxe bosses who regularly trade with humans learn to slow down their speech, to explain things in terms that make sense to human psychology, to avoid casual threats that might derail negotiations. This adaptation is not driven by empathy. Orcs do not do empathy, but by the practical recognition that good communication leads to better deals. The second major mechanism enabling orc-human cooperation is shared interest in violence. This might sound paradoxical, but it is crucial. Both species are warlike. Both understand combat. Both can appreciate skilled fighting even when they are not the ones doing it. An orc watching a human warrior perform an impressive feat of combat prowess will instinctively respect that human, regardless of species boundaries. Similarly, a human who has fought alongside orcs and seen their fearless charge into overwhelming odds cannot help but recognize a certain terrible valor in the greenskins. This shared appreciation for combat creates a common language more fundamental than words. When an orc and a human have fought together against a mutual enemy, they have shared an experience that transcends species. They have trusted each other with their lives, even if only temporarily and out of necessity. That creates a bond, not friendship exactly, but recognition. Each has seen the other tested in the crucible of battle and found them worthy. The third mechanism is mutual greed. Both orcs and humans value loot, wealth, and material goods, though they express this value in different ways. Orcs hoard weapons, vehicles, and trophies. Humans accumulate currency, trade goods, and power. But the underlying drive is similar enough that both species can recognize it in each other. A trade negotiation between an orc and a human might be tense and dangerous, but both parties understand what the other wants and can frame deals in terms that satisfy both sides. Practical cooperation also requires establishing clear rules and boundaries. In the neutral ports where different species mix, these rules are simple and brutally enforced. No fighting inside the trading posts, disputes settled in designated areas, betrayals punished by everyone ganging up on the betrayer. These rules benefit everyone by preventing the constant violence that would make trade impossible. Both orcs and humans can understand and follow such straightforward guidelines when the alternative is being kicked out of valuable trading opportunities. Trust, to the extent it exists at all in these relationships, it is built slowly and demonstrated through repeated interactions. A freebooter capitan who honors their contracts repeatedly will gradually earn a reputation for reliability. A human trader who provides good goods at fair prices will be remembered and sought out for future deals. Neither side trusts the other in any deep or meaningful sense, but they come to predict each other's behavior, and predictability creates a framework for cooperation. The role of individual personality cannot be overlooked. Not all orcs are identical, and those who are more intelligent, more curious, or simply more pragmatic are more likely to develop working relationships with humans. Similarly, not all humans are equally capable of setting aside their xenophobia and dealing with greenskins. The humans who successfully navigate orc society tend to be highly adaptable, pragmatic to the point of amorality, and possessed of exceptional courage or exceptional desperation. There are also moments, rare but documented, when something like genuine connection occurs. These are flashes of mutual understanding, brief instances when an orc and a human recognize something familiar in each other despite all their differences. An orc might spare a particularly brave human enemy out of respect for their fighting spirit. A human might warn an orc trading partner about a potential betrayal because doing so serves their long-term interests better than allowing the betrayal to succeed. These moments do not transform into lasting friendships. The species barriers are too fundamental, the cultural differences too vast. But they create small pockets of cooperation in a galaxy defined by war. They prove that even beings as different as orcs and humans can find reasons to not kill each other, at least temporarily. The mechanics of orc-human cooperation also depend heavily on the specific context. In a mercenary relationship, the mechanisms are payment and clear objectives. The human employer pays the orc mercenaries in goods they value. The orcs fight the enemies they are pointed at. As long as both sides fulfill their part of the bargain, the relationship continues. Introduce variables, delayed payment, unclear objectives, tempting alternative targets, and the arrangement collapses into violence. In a slavery context, the mechanics are entirely different. Here, the human survives by making themselves indispensable, by demonstrating skills that the orcs need but cannot replicate. The relationship is fundamentally unequal, maintained through a combination of utility and the orc owner's willingness to protect their property. It is not cooperation so much as a parasitic relationship where both parties benefit, the orc from the human skills and the human from not being immediately killed. In the rare cases of something approaching partnership, as in some freebooter crews with human members, the mechanics become more complex. The humans provide technical skills and knowledge. The orcs provide protection and combat capability. Both share in the profits of their piracy. The relationship is maintained through mutual benefit and the understanding that both sides are stronger together than apart, at least in the specific context of void piracy. Throughout all these mechanisms, one constant remains. The relationship is always contingent, always conditional, and always potentially violent. An orc who respects a human today might kill them tomorrow if circumstances change. A human who has successfully navigated orc society for years can be murdered on a whim if they make one wrong move. There is no safety, no permanent security, only the constant calculation of utility and danger. Yet despite these constraints, cooperation happens. Relationships form, understanding develops, not because either species is inherently capable of transcending their nature, but because both are pragmatic enough to recognize when breaking their nature serves their interest better than following it. In this sense, orc-human cooperation is a testament not to the capacity for friendship between species, but to the power of self-interest and practical necessity. It shows that even the most fundamental hatreds can be set aside when survival or profit demands it. It demonstrates that species barriers, no matter how seemingly absolute, become permeable when the right incentives align. This is not the hopeful message of universal brotherhood or the power of friendship to overcome all obstacles. It is something simultaneously more cynical and more realistic, the acknowledgement that beings will cooperate when cooperation serves them, regardless of how much they might hate each other in principle. In the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps that is the only basis for peace that can exist. Tales from the frontier. The theoretical frameworks and general patterns we have explored become vivid when we examine specific stories from the margins of imperial records. These tales, often fragmentary and incomplete, offer glimpses into the actual lived experiences of humans and orcs who found themselves in unlikely associations. While some of these accounts come from official imperial sources, others survive only as rumors, legends, or suppressed reports that the Inquisition would prefer remained buried. One of the most remarkable stories comes from the founding of Port Wonder, a massive void station that sits at the edge of the Coronis expanse. According to fragmentary records dating back to the station's early centuries, the initial settlement faced catastrophic attacks from orc raiders who saw the growing station as both a threat and an opportunity for loot. The Imperial Navy forces assigned to protect the station were insufficient, and appeals to Naval Command for reinforcements went unanswered for years. In desperation, the station's administrators reached out to a freebooter fleet known to operate in nearby space, offering them payment and regular access to the station's facilities in exchange for protection against other orc raiders. The freebooters, led by a Capitan whose name has been lost to history, agreed to the arrangement. For the next several decades, this freebooter fleet served as Port Wander's primary defense against external threats, driving off raiders and even fighting alongside Imperial Navy vessels when larger threats emerged. The relationship was never formalized, never appeared in official records, and was strenuously denied by Port Wander's administrators whenever inquisitorial inspections occurred. But it persisted because it worked. The freebooters got a safe port to repair their ships and trade their loot. The station got protection it could not otherwise afford. Both sides benefited, and so both sides maintained the fiction of legitimacy while engaging in what was technically heresy. Another account, this one from a deathbed confession, recorded by an ecclesiarchy priest, tells of an Imperial Guard sergeant named Marcus Valen, who spent 3 years living among Blood Axe orcs after his regiment was destroyed during a failed assault on an orc-held world. Valen was captured, but not immediately killed, and his technical skills as an engineer making him too valuable to waste. He was put to work maintaining the orcs' looted Imperial vehicles, a job that required him to interact daily with orc mech boys and their assistants. Over time, Valen learned to speak Orcish, understand their social hierarchies, and even predict their behavior patterns. He became, in his own words, more orc than human, adopting their crude mannerisms and direct communication style because it kept him alive. He earned the respect of his masters through his competence and his refusal to show fear, traits that orcs valued even in a slave. What makes Valen's account particularly fascinating is his description of gradually coming to see individual orcs as distinct personalities rather than an undifferentiated mass of Xenos threats, and he remembered the names of specific greenskins, described their quirks and preferences, and even admitted to feeling something like gratitude toward the mech boy who had protected him from other orcs who wanted to use him for target practice. When Imperial forces finally retook the world and liberated him, Valen struggled to readjust to human society, finding Imperial discipline and protocol alien after years of orcish directness. The priest who recorded his confession noted that Valen seemed to almost miss his time among the orcs, a sentiment so heretical that the priest immediately reported it to the Inquisition. Valen was executed shortly thereafter, his account sealed away as evidence of how Xenos contact could corrupt even loyal Imperial servants. But the confession survived in the archives, a testament to how deeply context and experience can reshape human perspective. From the Macarian Crusade comes the tale of an entire company of Imperial Guard soldiers who supposedly worked alongside Bloodaxe mercenaries for the duration of a planetary campaign. The official records make no mention of this, but veteran soldiers from that crusade whispered stories about the Green Company that fought on the Crusade's flank, taking objectives that regular Imperial forces could not reach and holding positions that should have been overrun. According to these whispered accounts, the arrangement began when a Crusade commander found himself desperately short of troops to hold a critical supply line. A Bloodaxe warboss offered to do the job for the right price, and the commander, facing the choice between potential heresy and certain defeat, accepted. The Bloodaxes performed excellently, their natural toughness and love of fighting making them ideal for the brutal close-quarters combat required. The Imperial Guard troops who fought alongside these orcs reportedly developed a grudging respect for the Greenskins, appreciating their fearlessness and reliability in combat, even while being horrified by their brutality and crude methods. Some soldiers claimed that by the campaign's end, they could predict how their orc allies would react in different situations, that they had developed a working understanding that transcended species barriers. When the campaign ended, and the Bloodaxes collected their payment and departed, yet the Crusade command apparently ordered all records of their involvement destroyed and threatened anyone who spoke of it with summary execution. The story survives only because veterans told it to their descendants, passing it down through generations as a strange legend from the Crusade years. A more recent account comes from the frontier world of Thalassa Prime, where a colonial administrator named Helena Sark supposedly developed a working relationship with a local orc warboss to manage the planet's defense against Tyranid scout organisms. The world was too remote and too poor to warrant significant Imperial military presence. And when the first Tyranid creatures appeared, Sark knew that her meager planetary defense forces would be overwhelmed. The planet's orc population, established centuries earlier and largely ignored by the human colonists who had settled in different regions, represented her only hope. Sark traveled to the orc settlement under flag of truce and proposed an alliance. The humans would provide the orcs with weapons and ammunition if the Greenskins would help fight the Tyranid threat. The warboss, recognizing that Tyranids were everyone's enemy and that fighting them promised excellent combat, agreed. For the next 2 years, human and orc forces fought side by side against the Tyranid infestation, developing tactics that used both species' strengths. Humans provided long-range fire support and coordination. Orcs provided fearless close-quarters combat and the willingness to charge directly into Tyranid swarms. Sark and the warboss met regularly to coordinate strategy, at their meetings gradually becoming less formal and more collegial as they developed mutual respect based on their shared struggle. The Tyranids were eventually defeated, and according to the reports, both sides honored the agreement afterward. The orcs received their promised weapons and withdrew to their settlements. The humans rebuilt their colonies. For several more years, an unofficial peace held between the two populations, with occasional trade and even coordinated responses to external threats. Then the Inquisition arrived. Upon learning of the collaboration, Inquisitor Halbrecht declared Sark excommunicate traitoris and ordered her execution, along with the execution of every human who had knowingly worked with the Xenos. The orc settlements were subjected to orbital bombardment, wiped out to prevent the taint of cooperation from spreading. Thalassa Prime was placed under inquisitorial oversight for the next century, its population reduced by 70% through the purges. The Inquisition's official report described the collaboration as a cautionary tale about how Xenos contact corrupts even well-meaning Imperial servants. But buried in the appendices is the acknowledgement that the collaboration had saved the planet, that without Orc assistance, Thalassa Prime would have been consumed by the Tyranids. This inconvenient fact was noted, but ultimately deemed irrelevant to the theological reality that cooperation with Xenos is heresy regardless of outcome. Perhaps the strangest account comes from a rogue trader named Balthazar Crane, whose journals describe a decades-long relationship with a freebooter Capitan he called Big Mac. Crane hired Big Mac's crew repeatedly for various expeditions into dangerous regions of space, and over the years developed what he described as a genuine professional friendship with the Orc leader. Crane's journals are remarkable for their detailed observations of Orcish behavior and psychology. He described Big Mac's personality quirks, his preference for head-on assaults over sneaky tactics, his tendency to get bored during long void journeys, his surprising memory for past battles and enemies. Crane wrote about learning to predict the Capitan's reactions, understanding when the Orc was joking versus serious, a distinction that apparently existed in their relationship, and even enjoying their conversations about tactics and warfare. Most striking is an entry where Crane described warning Big Mac about a betrayal being planned by other freebooters, information that Crane could have used to eliminate a dangerous Xenos, but chose instead to share because he valued Big Mac's continued existence more than a temporary advantage. Big Mac apparently returned the favor years later, tipping off Crane about an ambush that would have destroyed the rogue trader's fleet. Crane's journals were discovered after his death and immediately seized by the Inquisition. The rogue trader's warrant of trade protected him from prosecution during his life, but his descendants faced intensive investigation and several were executed for suspected Xenos sympathy. The journals themselves were classified, available only to high-ranking inquisitors studying the corruption that prolonged Xenos contact could cause. These stories share certain common elements. They occur on the frontier, far from direct Imperial oversight. They involve practical necessity creating incentives for cooperation that override ideological purity. They feature individuals who are pragmatic enough to set aside hatred when survival demands it. And they all end badly, if not for the participants, then for those who come after, because the Imperium cannot tolerate the existence of successful human-Xenos cooperation. The suppression of these accounts is systematic and thorough. The Inquisition maintains entire departments dedicated to identifying and destroying evidence of peaceful or cooperative Xenos contact. Records are altered or destroyed, as witnesses are interrogated and usually executed. Even rumors are tracked down and their sources eliminated. The official Imperial narrative allows for only one type of human-Xenos interaction: war. Yet the stories persist. Veterans tell them in quiet moments. Frontier colonists pass them down through generations. Rogue traders share them in private gatherings, understanding that these tales represent valuable intelligence about what is actually possible versus what official doctrine claims. The truth, uncomfortable as it may be to Imperial theology, is that humans and Orcs have cooperated successfully in countless unreported instances across the galaxy's long history. These collaborations do not last. They cannot last. Not in a galaxy where the Imperium's response to any Xenos cooperation is extermination. But they happen, and again in every era and every sector, because the basic incentives remain constant. When humans need allies and orcs need reliable trading partners or employers, both species are capable of setting aside their mutual hatred long enough to achieve their goals. The tragedy of these stories is not that they end in violence and betrayal. That is expected in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The tragedy is that they must be hidden, denied, suppressed, because acknowledging their existence would undermine the ideological foundations of the Imperium itself. The greatest threat these stories pose is not military or strategic, but philosophical. They suggest that the Emperor's doctrine of absolute xenophobia might not be the only path to human survival, and that is a thought the Imperium cannot permit its citizens to entertain. The nature of respect and combat. As we near the end of our exploration, we must address a fundamental question. What exactly is the nature of the connection that forms between orcs and humans who develop these unlikely relationships? Is it friendship, mutual respect, pragmatic cooperation, or something stranger, something that exists in the spaces between these familiar categories? To answer this, we must return to the orcish concept of scumgrod, the favorite enemy. This term captures something essential about how orcs experience relationships with those outside their species. An orc does not have friends in the human sense. The psychology required for friendship, empathy, emotional vulnerability, desire for companionship, simply does not exist in the greenskin mind. Orcs have allies, temporarily, and based on mutual benefit. They have rivals within their own society. Orcs they compete with, but also fight alongside. They have enemies, which is pretty much everyone else. But Scumgrod represents something different. It is an enemy who is so entertaining to fight, who provides such good combat, who demonstrates such impressive qualities that the orc does not want them dead. Killing a Scumgrod would mean losing access to future battles with that opponent, and since orcs value good fighting above almost everything else, this would be a genuine loss. So the orc preserves their favorite enemy, seeks them out for repeated confrontations, and takes a certain pride in the relationship. From a human perspective, being someone's favorite enemy is a bizarre and terrifying status. Whilst it means you are being stalked by a powerful alien who wants to fight you repeatedly until one of you dies, it means you can never truly rest or feel safe because you know your nemesis is out there, planning your next encounter. But it also means something remarkable. You have earned the respect of a being that respects almost no one, that you have impressed a species that is nearly impossible to impress. This respect is not affection. It carries no warmth, no desire for the other's well-being, no emotional attachment in any recognizable sense. But it is genuine acknowledgement of worth, a recognition that this particular opponent has value beyond their immediate utility. In the context of Warhammer 40,000, where most beings view each other as resources to exploit or obstacles to destroy, even this cold respect represents something meaningful. The Yarrick-Gazkul relationship exemplifies this perfectly. Gazkul does not love Yarrick, does not care about his happiness or safety, except insofar as it relates to their future battles. But the warlord genuinely values the commissar's existence. Yarrick makes the war more interesting. Fighting against him is more satisfying than fighting against random Imperial commanders. When Gazkul speaks about Yarrick, it is with something approaching fondness, the way a human might speak about a particularly challenging puzzle or a worthy opponent in a sport. For Yarrick's part, the relationship is similarly complex. He has dedicated his life to destroying Gazkul, pursuing the warlord across the galaxy with single-minded obsession. Hatred drives him, certainly, but also something deeper. Gazkul has become the defining feature of Yarrick's existence, the enemy against whom he measures himself, the opponent who gives his struggle meaning. In a perverse way, Yarrick needs Gazkul as much as Gazkul needs Yarrick. This codependence through combat represents perhaps the truest form of connection possible between such different species. They understand each other in the only language both truly speak: violence. Each has studied the other extensively, learned their patterns, predicted their strategies. They have spent more time thinking about each other than about almost anyone else in their respective lives. The intimacy of this knowledge, born from countless battles and decades of pursuit, creates a bond that transcends conventional categories. More other orc-human relationships that develop from repeated combat follow similar patterns. Imperial Guard soldiers who have fought repeatedly against the same orc warband begin to recognize individual greenskins to predict their behavior in battle. Orcs who encounter the same human units repeatedly start to remember specific commanders or particularly tough soldiers. Neither side would call this friendship, but it represents a form of recognition, an acknowledgement of the other as more than just another faceless enemy. The respect that emerges from combat has a particular character in Warhammer 40,000. It is earned through demonstrated capability, proven repeatedly in the crucible of battle. An orc who spares a human opponent after defeating them does so because that human fought well enough to be worth sparing. This not out of mercy, but out of the desire to fight them again. A human commander who treats captured orc warriors with a measure of dignity does so because those warriors proved their courage and skill, earning a status above random prisoners. This combat-based respect system actually provides a more stable foundation for orc-human cooperation than many seemingly more peaceful approaches would. Both species understand the language of strength. Both can appreciate skilled fighting even from an enemy. When an orc and a human develop mutual respect through battle, they have established a relationship based on observable, demonstrable facts, rather than abstract principles or emotional connections. The practical implications of this become clear in mercenary relationships. As a freebooter capitan, hired by a rogue trader, will fight more effectively and reliably if that rogue trader has previously demonstrated competence in combat. The orc respects strength and skill, and seeing those qualities in their employer makes the relationship more stable. Similarly, a rogue trader is more likely to trust orc mercenaries who have proven themselves in previous battles, whose combat effectiveness has been demonstrated rather than merely claimed. Yet we must be careful not to romanticize this dynamic. The respect that exists between orcs and humans in these relationships is always contingent, always dependent on continued demonstration of the qualities that earned it initially. An orc who respects a human's combat prowess might lose that respect if the human shows weakness or cowardice. As a human who values an orc mercenary's effectiveness might turn on them if they fail to perform or become unreliable. Moreover, this respect exists within very narrow boundaries. An orc might respect a human warrior's fighting ability, while still viewing humans generally as weak and inferior. A human might acknowledge an individual orc's courage, while still believing that the species as a whole represents a threat that must be exterminated. The respect is personal and specific, not generalizable to entire species. The question of whether these relationships qualify as friendship ultimately depends on how we define the term. If friendship requires emotional attachment, desire for the other's well-being, and concern that extends beyond utility, then no, orcs and humans cannot be friends. The psychological differences are too fundamental. But if we define friendship more broadly as a bond characterized by mutual recognition, shared experiences, and preference for each other's continued existence, even if that preference is based on self-interest, then perhaps something like friendship can exist between them. In the end, perhaps we need a new term entirely, something that acknowledges the unique nature of these cross-species bonds forged in the context of eternal war. They are relationships built on respect, earned through combat, sustained by mutual benefit, and terminated by death or changing circumstance. They are friendships of necessity, alliances of convenience, but also something more, acknowledgements that even enemies can recognize worth in each other, that even the most alien minds can find limited common ground. In the grim darkness of the far future, Where there is only war. Perhaps that is the highest form of connection that can exist. Not love, not even friendship as we understand it, but respect. Hard-earned, carefully maintained, and always conditional on continued demonstration of the qualities that earned it in the first place. Conclusion. Finding humanity in the grimdark. We have journeyed deep into one of Warhammer 40,000's most fascinating contradictions, the possibility of connection between humans and orcs. Two species that should be eternal enemies, but who sometimes, against all odds and all doctrine, find ways to coexist, cooperate, and even develop something approaching mutual respect. What have we learned from this exploration? And what does it tell us about the wider themes of the Warhammer 40,000 universe? First, and most importantly, we have learned that the absolute pronouncements of Imperial doctrine, suffer not the alien to live, death to all Xenos, eternal war against all non-human species, do not reflect the messy, complicated reality of how different species actually interact. On the frontier, in the desperate margins where survival trumps ideology, humans and orcs have found countless ways to work together when practical necessity demands it. These collaborations are pragmatic rather than idealistic, driven by self-interest rather than enlightened values, but they happen nonetheless. The existence of these relationships does not make them right by Imperial standards, nor does it suggest that the Imperium's xenophobia lacks foundation. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is genuinely hostile. Most Xeno species do represent legitimate threats to humanity. The Imperium's paranoid militarism, while excessive and brutal, arose from real experiences of Xenos predation and betrayal. The doctrine of absolute xenophobia, whatever its moral shortcomings, has helped humanity survive for 10,000 years in a galaxy that wants humans dead. But survival and morality are not the same thing, and the Imperium's success does not validate every aspect of its ideology. The stories we have explored suggest that blanket xenophobia, while understandable, might not be the only path to human survival. They hint at possibilities for more nuanced approaches to Xenos relations, approaches that distinguish between species and individuals, rather than treating all aliens as identical threats. The Bloodaxe orcs, who work as mercenaries, are not any less dangerous than other orcs. But they demonstrate that some greenskins can be temporarily aligned with human interests. The freebooters who maintain long-term trading relationships with human smugglers prove that cross-species commerce can benefit both parties. Even the slaves who become valued advisors show that individual orcs can learn to value individual humans for their specific skills and qualities. These examples do not suggest that humans should embrace orcs as allies or friends in any general sense. Orcs remain fundamentally violent, aggressive, and dangerous. They will never share human values or adopt human ethics. Even the most cooperative Bloodaxe warboss is still an orc, still driven by instincts and impulses that make them incompatible with peaceful coexistence. Any human who forgets this will probably die violently. But the examples do suggest that the space between ally and enemy contains more nuance than Imperial doctrine acknowledges. The concept of scumgrod, favorite enemy, captures this nuance perfectly. It is a relationship that remains fundamentally adversarial while also containing elements of respect and even preference for the other's continued existence. It allows for temporary cooperation without requiring permanent trust, for mutual benefit without shared values. The legend of Yarrick and Gazg-Kul stands as the ultimate expression of this dynamic. Their relationship has spanned decades and shaped the course of major wars. They have saved each other's lives, though always for their own reasons rather than from altruism. They have developed an understanding so deep that each can predict the other's moves with remarkable accuracy. Yet they remain implacable enemies, each dedicated to the other's eventual destruction. And this enmity is what makes their relationship meaningful rather than contradicting it. From a storytelling perspective, these orc-human relationships work because they add complexity to what could otherwise be a simplistic setting. Warhammer 40,000 would be boring if every interaction between different species followed the same pattern of immediate violence. The possibility of cooperation, even temporary and self-interested cooperation, creates space for more interesting narratives. It allows for moral complexity, for difficult choices, for characters who must balance survival against doctrine. The suppression of these stories by imperial authorities also serves important narrative purposes. It demonstrates the Imperium's paranoia and inflexibility, showing how an authoritarian state must deny uncomfortable truths to maintain ideological control. The fact that the Inquisition hunts down and kills anyone who has successfully cooperated with Xenos proves that the Imperium fears its own citizens, learning that alternatives to eternal war might exist. For fans of Warhammer 40,000, these relationships offer something rare in the setting: hope, or at least a particular kind of hope. Not the naive hope that all species might one day live together in harmony. That would be absurdly out of place in this universe. But the more modest hope that individual beings, even from radically different species, can recognize worth in each other. That pragmatism can sometimes overcome hatred. That the capacity for cooperation survives even in the most hostile environments. This hope is grim, limited, and always temporary. It exists in the margins, never acknowledged, constantly threatened. Those who embody it are often punished for their success. But it persists, proved again and again by frontier traders, desperate colonists, pragmatic rogue traders, and the rare individuals from both species who can set aside xenophobia long enough to see value in the other. The stories we have explored also remind us that the Warhammer 40,000 universe, for all its darkness, contains multitudes. It is a setting large enough to accommodate countless different types of stories, from the grand heroic narratives of space marines saving humanity to the small, strange tales of unlikely cooperation on forgotten frontier worlds. Both types of stories are valid. Both contribute to the rich tapestry of the setting. Perhaps most importantly, these stories about orc-human relationships demonstrate that even in the grim darkness of the far future, individual choices matter. The Imperium's doctrine is clear. Xenos must die. Cooperation is heresy. Mercy is weakness. But individual humans, Yarrick, Helena Sark, Marcus Valen, countless unnamed traders and soldiers and slaves, chose differently. They evaluated their specific situations, recognized opportunities for cooperation, and acted on those recognitions despite the enormous risks. Some of these choices led to survival. Some led to tragedy. All of them demonstrated human agency persisting even in a setting designed to deny the value of individual choice. The Imperium wants its citizens to be cogs in an unthinking machine, automatically executing doctrine without thought or hesitation. But humans remain human. They think, they adapt, they make choices, and sometimes those choices lead them to work with the very enemies they are supposed to hate. The orcs in these stories show similar complexity. They are not mindless monsters following pure instinct. They make choices too, deciding whether to kill or spare, whether to honor contracts or break them, whether to value an individual human's skills or treat them as disposable. The blood axes who learn human languages and tactics, the freebooters who maintain long-term trading relationships, the individual orcs who protect valuable human slaves, all demonstrate agency and decision-making that goes beyond simple programming. As we conclude this exploration, I want to emphasize one final point. The relationships we have discussed are not prescriptive. They do not suggest that readers should view orcs as misunderstood friends, or that the Imperium is wrong to view Xenos as threats. Warhammer 40,000 is a dark satire of authoritarian excess, xenophobia, and militarism, not a straightforward moral fable. The setting's darkness is part of its appeal, and trying to redeem or reform it misses the point. But within that darkness, small lights can flicker. Individual humans and orcs who find ways to cooperate, unlikely relationships that form despite everything working against them, moments of understanding between beings who should be eternal enemies. These lights do not illuminate the whole setting, do not transform the grim darkness into hope and redemption. But they exist, and their existence matters. They matter because they demonstrate the limits of totalitarian control. The Imperium cannot completely suppress the human tendency to adapt, to find solutions, to cooperate when cooperation serves survival. They matter because they add nuance and complexity to what could be a one-dimensional setting. And they matter because they remind us that even in the most hostile circumstances, even between the most alien minds, some form of connection remains possible. If you have enjoyed this deep dive into one of Warhammer 40,000's most unusual topics, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There is so much more to explore in this vast, dark, endlessly fascinating universe, and I look forward to continuing our journey through its lore together. Thank you for listening, and may the Emperor protect you wherever your own journey takes you through the grim darkness of the far future.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.